I'd like to say a few words to you now regarding the role of the European Commission in the authorization process and in facilitating the rollout of vaccination. Next slide. The issues I'll be talking about concern the adoption of an EU vaccination strategy and what the objectives of that strategy were. I'll talk to you about the authorization process from the perspective of the Commission and also the importance of public information on this process. I'd like to then speak about the discussions which we've had with the Member States on preparedness for the rollout of the vaccination and for the deployment of the vaccine. The latest situation regarding the Member States rollout will be explained in more detail on the basis of the survey which we carried out with the Member States. I'd like to say a few words then on public confidence and on the main concerns and issues which we have identified so far within the European Union, and on the communication activities aimed at building public confidence. And finally, I'll give you some additional resources if you have questions regarding any of the points in my presentation. Next slide. So, kicking off in June, we in the European Commission proposed a vaccination strategy, which we agreed with the Member States on the 17th of June, which looked at several different important points, I think. First of all, to accelerate the development, the manufacturing, and the deployment of vaccines for COVID, to ensure the quality, safety, and efficacy of those vaccines, to guarantee a swift and equitable access to the vaccines for our Member States and our populations, while at the same time balancing this with the need to support the international solidarity for the availability of vaccines. Next slide. Further points which were discussed and agreed in this strategy document were that the European Union should secure the production of vaccines sufficient for our population through advanced purchase agreements with vaccine producers using funds from the European Union budget in the emergency support instrument. And this is the process where we actually negotiated and purchased through an advanced purchase agreement a number of potential vaccines. And then there's the issue, of course, of how to make sure that the regulatory framework and the flexibility which is contained in our existing regulatory framework should be taken advantage of to make sure that the regulatory side goes as quickly as the scientific side, in order to make sure that the development, the authorization, and the availability of vaccines at the scale of the entire EU population is done as quickly as possible. Next slide. So as regards the role of the Commission, the first stage is that the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use carries out an independent scientific assessment of the application of the pharmaceutical company, and the agency then submits its scientific opinion to the Commission, which is responsible for issuing the marketing authorization that's valid for the entire European Union. Following a positive recommendation from the European Medicines Agency, the Commission verifies the soundness of or the correctness of all the supporting elements, for example, the scientific justification, the product information, the educational material for healthcare professionals, the labeling of the product, and the obligations for the vaccine developer, conditions for use, and possible obligations for Member States. These are all the elements that the Commission reviews. And when this information is verified, we also check, of course, that the necessary information is available to patients and to healthcare professionals across EU in their national language. And before we make a final decision, we consult with the Member States. Thank you. Next slide. So, in terms of the public information, if the qualified majority of the Member States is in favour, the European Commission would adopt a decision authorizing the marketing of the vaccine and would inform the developer, the pharmaceutical company concerned. And this is published transparently in the European Registry of Medicinal Products. And then as a consequence, the vaccine can now be marketed everywhere in the European Union. Next slide. As regards preparedness for vaccination and vaccine deployment, we published a communication on the 15th of October, which laid out a number of key elements which the member states would need to take into account in making their preparedness for the vaccination campaign. First of all, the allocation of sufficient capacity within the healthcare system to deliver the vaccines. Looking at the issues of easy and affordable access for target populations, in other words, for the vulnerable groups that have been defined in the national strategies. Thirdly, the deployment of vaccines with different product characteristics, different storage needs, different transport needs, and the issue of communication on the benefits and risks and the importance of vaccines as a response measure for the ongoing pandemic. Next slide. Now, we carried out a survey with the member states to see how they were reacting to this communication of October. And many member states plan to use existing vaccination services and their current reserves of personal protective equipment. Many plan to stockpile equipment via national or the EU joint procurement procedures. We have a number of these contracts in place at European Union level in concerning personal protective equipment, but also syringes and needles and so on. The majority of member states said that they would offer the vaccination free of charge. And the majority, of course, as well, have existing national immunization information registries. And they're going to use these registries to process the vaccination data at national level. Next slide. So I turn now to the questions regarding the public and the public confidence. And we have national focal points for vaccination who have reported a number of issues of public concern. And these can be summarized as concerning safety and efficacy of the vaccine, the eventual side effects of the vaccine, questions on the speed on which the vaccines were developed, and the thoroughness of the clinical trials and the risk assessment that was carried out. I'm just repeating here now what will be the topics that have been identified as issues of public concern. There's also a lot of fake news and disinformation floating around, not only concerning COVID vaccines, but vaccination in general. And on the other hand, there's a lack of reliable information sources for the public in an accessible way, I would say. And when people start to look for information through social media or through the internet, they very often come on the wrong, on information which is not validated, shall we say. There's also an issue regarding mandatory and voluntary vaccination, and this is of particular interest to the healthcare professionals. And finally, there's the issue of the country of origin of the vaccine manufacturer, which has been raised as an issue by several parts of the public. Next slide. So what we've tried to do is to share available scientific information and also share information on the current epidemiological situation and the way it's developing. So we try and be transparent. We publish all of our risk assessments as well publicly, and we publish the minutes of meetings where the member states are discussing the response. So we try and really insist on having a maximum of transparency in respect of the available data on the outbreak, but also on the discussion of what the response should be. We're also monitoring through social media the questions and doubts that have been expressed regarding the COVID vaccine, and also making an effort to be constructive and to put out validated scientific information on the nature of the vaccine and why it would be a useful public health tool. We also try and dialogue with target groups, in particular the representatives of the aged associations, people with chronic diseases, associations of people with chronic diseases, associations of healthcare professionals. This dialogue is going on all the time, so we don't talk only with the member states or with the scientific community, but also with a much wider group of operators, shall we say, who may have an interest in COVID and its control and its vaccination. We try and use the social media, the mass media, television programs and radios to circulate information. And we also provide this information in a way that the member states can use the elements on a national level. And we have provided a number of elements of information to public health authorities and general practitioners, because not all of the member states are in the same position as regards the support that they can give to public health authorities and general practitioners and pharmacists, for example, and nurses. Some countries are better equipped in communication tools, and therefore the Commission and the European Medicines Agency have been making an effort to reach out and make available information and resources to those who would be responsible for delivering the vaccine. Next slide. So I mentioned these additional resources. We have a new website on safe and effective vaccination, which is available in all of the EU languages. And we also have a number of fact sheets, which are useful summaries of issues regarding vaccination and COVID, which are also available in languages, in different languages. And we have a report of the ECDC, which I would also mention, the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. And if you'd like, we also have some videos from very well-known scientists like Peter Piot, or nurses and patients, which we also make available, which I think gives a personal touch and shows the appreciation of individuals rather than institutions regarding the vaccine. So those were my main points in my presentation, and looking forward to the discussion afterwards, of course.